the SmallmouthCrush podcast. If you're a hardcore angler, you've come to the right place. This is a weekly podcast that will interview some of the top smallmouth bass anglers in North America. Travis and his guest will discuss what it takes to consistently catch big smallmouth, and you'll get a glimpse inside the mind of a trophy smallmouth angler. And now, here's your host of the SmallmouthCrush podcast, Travis Manson.
Hello, welcome to the SmallmouthCrush podcast. My name is Travis Manson. Another amazing week talking smallmouth fishing. I can't get enough of it. I know you guys are digging it. We've had top-level pros from across the country. We've talked to local anglers that just dominate a particular body of water. We've had big water anglers, river anglers, anglers from all over the place, all over the country. And this week's guest is a big name. Okay, he knows what he's doing when it comes to putting big bass in the boat, especially smallmouth bass. And I'm really, really excited to bring him on. But first, before we go there, let's talk about The Real Shot, of course. They've been supporting this podcast throughout the year, and they're becoming the place to go for all your tackle needs. Whatever a SmallmouthCrush fan could ask for, they have it, whether it be Jackal, Megabass, Shimano, Dirty Jig, St. Croix, Z-Man, Evergreen, you know it. They got it all. Rapala, VMC, it doesn't matter. They got it. And if you head on over to therealshot.com, use my code SmallmouthCrush15, we're going to give you 15% off your first order. So please take advantage of that and let them know Smallmouth Crush sent you. Well, let's get into it. Let's bring our next guest on, and there he is. He pops right up. Josh, how are you doing tonight, man?
What's the good word, man? Thank you for having me on. Dude,
I'm excited. You know why? Because I don't have a lot of West Coast guests on the show. You know, can we call you West Coast? Is that fair?
Everyone does. I'm like probably 500 miles from the coast, but everyone does because I'm like, I'm out west for sure, dude.
I'm out west. Yeah.
I'm a desert fisherman. I'm a desert rat. I live in Arizona, so but I guess West Coast will do for sure.
Tell me, is there desert smallmouth?
There actually are. Yeah. They're a little bit different than the smallmouth, up where you guys are at, but I'd say about half of our lakes have smallmouth and some good ones, man. A couple good, good bodies of water that have them for sure.
Dude, that's crazy. I'm excited to talk to you about that. I've had very limited experience on the West Coast. Few lakes I've been to, but I don't get out there as often, just like pretty much a lot of our viewers and listeners probably do get the chance. So I'm really excited to hear about the smallmouth out west. But then we got to talk. I mean, you dominate a lot of big bodies of water, Great Lakes, all that stuff. So I want to dig into that. But before we go too much further, Josh, can you just give our viewers and listeners a little bit background about yourself and kind of your story of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. And hey, man, I expect to learn something from you in this podcast too about fishing up north. So this is gonna be a two-way street here.
Right.
But for me anyways, I been bass fishing my whole life. I'm 32 right now. I got out of high school and I went to college for like a year and a half, and like a dummy, I dropped out because I was having to, I was guiding like full time, and I was having to turn away guide trips to go to college. So I thought it'd be a good idea to drop out of college, which no one else thought the same thing, man. But I guided full time and fished regional tournaments, and through the Bassmaster Opens, I qualified for the Elite Series when I was 23. So I made it pretty early onto the tour, and, just kind of had to learn as I went. Like I was pretty green. I didn't think I was green. When you're 23, you think you know it all, man. But like every year that would go by, I'd realize like, man, there's so much more to learn. There's so much more to learn. And it's still the same way now, man. Like the more you fish, the more you realize there's a lot out there. Fished over there for 6 years, switched over to Major League Fishing. It's going to be going on 3 years ago now. So that's what I'm doing now. Fish the Bass Pro Tour, but been fishing pretty much full time since I was out of college, man. I got really lucky to be able to do that. And, knock on wood, man, I can continue doing it because I love it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, that whole process, I mean, being able to travel all over the country, you've seen a lot of amazing bodies of water. You've experienced it all from the Great Lakes to, river systems, even southern smallmouth. And now we're going to be able to talk a little bit about the fish that live on the West Coast. Let's dive into that because that really intrigues me. Talk to me a little bit about your experience fishing smallmouth in your home state and as well as lakes around that region.
Sure. So, and I know you've talked about it on the show, how different smallmouth can behave around the country, right? And I guess they all have some similarities, but, we've got out here the bodies of water that have them. The best water that's got smallmouth in the Southwest is the Colorado River. So the Colorado River, the big lakes that you have on the Colorado River chain are Lake Powell, Lake Mead, Lake Havasu, and Mojave. And all those lakes are at least 3 hours from where I live, but I've kind of grown up fishing them. You know what I mean? Like I'll travel 3 hours for a tournament, not a big deal. So that's a big bulk of my smallmouth experience out west. And what's really interesting is the top of the chain, the big giant lakes, Powell and Mead. Those lakes, they're some of the biggest reservoirs in the country and some of the toughest reservoirs to fish in the country, and not for numbers, but for size. I mean, the smallmouth are as big as the largemouth, but I mean, they're not big fish lakes at all. You really, really, if you catch a 3-pounder, it's a really, really good one. But what's interesting is when you get down to Havasu and Mojave, it's Toad City. It's the same water that's flowing through. But the big difference that I see is the water level in Havasu and Mojave is much more stable, and they've been able to do a lot of like habitat projects. Zebra mussels got into Havasu, and they're actually in all of them now. But the biggest difference I see is like the stable water level. The water on Powell and Mead, it fluctuates so much. Like it sounds cartoonish, but right now they're both over 100 feet down from full pool. Still massive bodies of water, but they're still 100 feet down. And every year it's changing. Havasu and Mojave, they're still big lakes, but they're lower on the chain and they keep those lakes full. So that's got to have a lot to do with just the health of the fisheries.
Sure. What's your favorite body of water over there to fish for smallmouth, if you could pick just one?
I'd say Havasu, man. And the river, what I left out was the river itself, right? So like there are a lot of, between the reservoirs, you got stretches of river that are phenomenal. But yeah, Havasu is probably it's the best. It's the most consistent. It's highly pressured, but it's full. I mean, it's very common to have, 20 pounds of all smallmouth at Havasu, especially when fishing's good. Yep. It's, you don't see like 7s and 8s, but there are so many 4s, there are so many 4s.
Wow. So those lakes, or those fish on Havasu, can you walk me through real quickly kind of the seasonal, pattern as far as how you would target those? If we could maybe start out what I would consider, I know the climate's a little different there, but I'm sure you have a solid winter and pre-spawn through the spawn type of deal that happens probably in early spring, right? That March, April timeframe.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like Florida where in Florida, as you know, like it has to get cold enough for the fish to spawn. Like the water gets close to 50 in the wintertime out here. So it's got to warm up a touch to get that going. So they start thinking about it in February, but realistically March is the month when you see a lot of them start to spawn. And what's one other interesting thing about our desert lakes is the spawn lasts for a long time out here because a lot of them are so steep that there's only X amount of spawning habitat. And there are a lot of fish, man. So they literally have to share that spawning habitat and wait. So like the spawn will start sometimes the first week of March, and it'll go all the way through May. You'll be able to find a bedfish in May just because I think there's just not enough habitat for them to all go at once. Whereas like, certain parts of the country, like Table Rock, man, like that bell goes off and they all spawn in like 2 weeks and it's done. Because there's pea gravel all over the entire lake. So it's kind of interesting. Interesting fact about the Western lakes, like the spawn, it lasts forever. And that's the easiest time to catch them, right? Like the wintertime, those smallies, they do typical They do typical wintertime stuff. Sometimes they suspend, sometimes they get on some steeper rock. Sometimes, you get a warming trend and they'll go warm themselves up on some shallower rock, but they kind of act like typical winter fish.
Are they
In
grouped
the
up like a lot of these other lakes that you find smallmouth in?
A little bit, but it's not as deep. Like I'm just talking Havasu, I guess.
Mhm.
Like, they you won't find a school of like hundreds of them.
Mm.
You don't find too many schools. It's not quite as deep as some of our other lakes out west for sure. So yeah, I wouldn't say they group up like crazy, man. It's kind of
Interesting, yeah.
hunting and pecking. Yeah, which is definitely interesting. Our largemouth group up. The largemouth school up big time, but like we've got some other lakes out here where we catch a lot of fish on like jigging spoons, right? You get on some
Mhm.
fish in 40 or 50 feet and you can have some amazing days largemouth fishing. But these same lakes have smallmouth, Roosevelt and Apache, and you'll never catch a smallmouth doing it. It's very
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
Like, yeah, I know smallmouth goes super deep on the Great Lakes, right? Like you catch them at 40, 50 feet at times, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. What kind of baits are you gonna use to target then? You talk spoons, and I mean, that's kinda what I would assume. I thought you'd be able to go over there and find a big group of wintering smallmouth, but, uh, I guess that's not the case. What baits are you targeting those fish with during that winter, pre-spawn timeframe?
A lot of hard baits, jerk
Mhm.
baits, crankbaits, stuff like that when the weather's right. Ned rig is really good. Always a drop shot. Small swim bait. Those are kind of the go-tos. You can
Mm.
catch them on some metal stuff, man. You can catch them on a tail spinner or a blade bait or something like that. But I just find it interesting. Like I've had some of the most epic days and you catch everything in the lake. Like these lakes, they
Mhm.
have warm water species, so you're going to catch largemouth, yellow bass, catfish, bluegill, crappie. You'll never catch a smallmouth in those
Yeah.
deep
Hmm.
schools. And you pick up a crankbait and you go down a steep rocky bank and you catch a smallmouth. So kind of weird how they don't do that. And I've caught smallmouth other parts of the country pretty deep. We went to Cherokee a few years ago in like February, and they were huge schools of smallmouth in like 30 feet, man. It was a straight up wintertime deal, 30, 35 feet. And there were hundreds of them down on these spots, but not on these lakes quite as much.
Right. Wow. So as these fish start to spawn, and you mentioned that the spawn can last good month or two. March, April, May-ish. Do they bed fairly deeper than what you've seen in other parts of the country, or they position themselves a little shallower? I'm interested on your take on that.
Good question. Yeah, they'll bed as deep as the water clarity allows them to do it. So on years where you have really good water clarity, it's pretty common for them to spawn in like 15 feet because you might be able to see 20. So that's where the flogger comes into play. I know that's really big up north.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, before the flogger came out, we had 5-gallon buckets where you'd cut the bottom out and silicone a circle of plexiglass into your bucket.
Really?
And yeah.
That was going on there, huh?
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, we were doing
Do you
that, 15 years
do
ago.
you think that technique was invented in that region? I'm not familiar on the history of it, but
I have no idea either, man. Like,
yeah.
it was kind of a northern company that came up with the official flogger, right? And I
Right, but
bought one because it was better than what I was using. But
I know I've never seen before the flogger came out and a few individuals made it more mainstream. I never even noticed, or maybe people were just keeping it low key, I would imagine.
maybe so. Now we can talk about it because it's public. But my buddy who had
Sure.
made the one that we used, we'd keep that thing in a pillowcase, dude.
Uh-huh.
And when any
Wow.
boat would come by us, we'd hop up and put that thing in the pillowcase and put it in the bottom of the boat. We wanted to keep it secret, but
Sure.
it was so effective because the water's so clear and they'd spawn so deep. But years where you don't have quite that same clarity, they'll spawn a little bit shallower.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So, I mean, 15 foot, that's pretty deep. I'm just thinking my experience on the Great Lakes and whatnot. It's, it's, it happens, but it's not common, like you
they
mentioned.
go shallower, huh?
Yeah, definitely. And so
Interesting.
that's interesting that they'll go that deep. Now, how do you, without the your homemade flogger or a flogger today, is it hard to judge the size when they're down 15?
That's a great call. Yeah, man. I've heard stories about like tournaments at Champlain and other lakes where dudes would literally catch them before in practice to see how big they are. And we would do 100% the same thing because they were so aggressive. You would literally catch them in practice and plan out your day off of what bedfish you caught. So yeah, they're totally hard to judge. So often, dude, you're like, is this a 3 or a 4.5? And sometimes you're right, sometimes you weren't, but incredible, huh?
Yeah, that is. So as they get out, after the spawn, there's probably a transition. I would imagine it's going to get hot there, I imagine. So what are those fish doing in the summertime? And is it easy to catch them? Does it get a little tough?
It gets a little tough, but they keep biting. The summertime out west, we don't get our lakes are deep enough that we don't get that 92-degree water that you have in the south, which is so hard to catch fish in, right? So even the hottest time of year when it's 110 degrees every day, the water temp's still going to be 86, 87, which is hot.
Right.
But it's hot, dude, but that's not 92, they're still alive. And what's cool is that they really bite topwater good that time of year. Topwater bite can be really, really fun in the summertime. And, you can catch them on other stuff. When fishing's tough and the water's slicked off, we catch them on a spy bait really good. And especially transitioning into the fall, when it starts to cool off a little bit, I start throwing a spy bait a lot, but continue with the topwater. As soon as May hits, topwater is probably the best way to get those smallmouth. And you could always catch one on a Ned rig. You could always catch one on a drop shot any day out of the whole year. But that's kind of it gets hotter and gets more fun to catch them on a big walking bait for sure. Right.
Is that a bite that can last all day in the dead of heat, or is that a morning and low, I guess, evening? And I do want to ask if you do any night fishing for smallmouth.
Yeah, dude. So in the heat of the summer, it's timing. You have to get them early or late. Soon as it starts to cool off and you get into late September and into October, they'll bite it all day long. October is the best month to throw it all day. But yeah, in the summertime, it gets so hot that you do put the topwater down midday. And then it's interesting on the night fishing side too. You hear about these, I hear about these stories of dudes in Tennessee and even in the Ozarks catching toad smallmouth at night. And I've caught some at night, but I had night fished a lot growing up. I don't do it so much anymore. I got a couple toddlers at home, and sneaking away for a night trip is the last thing I'm able to do. But I fished a lot at night up until a few years ago. And I really, it wasn't anything but a surprise when you catch one.
Accidentally. Yeah. I got you.
Yep.
Sure. Always curious about that. I haven't tried it in the northern part of the country. I'm sure it would work. They're going to be active, of course, but I just wonder how effective that would be. When you're talking topwaters, are you talking, popping type baits, walking baits? What's your favorite topwater, in the summer months that we were just talking about?
I personally hate throwing a popper, man. It's just slow for me. Yeah, okay. I don't mind fishing on the bottom slow, but I have a hard time throwing a popper. I will, but I like a walking bait for sure. It's frustrating because you can lose some fish. You know how smallmouth come up, and I'm sure you. Do you prefer a bait with 2 or 3 hooks when you're fishing for these things with a walking bait?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I love a walking bait. I love a larger bait like a super spook or something like that with 3 hooks. There's a lot of different topwater baits out there. And I always ask people when they have some success on topwaters, I want to know, do you get into all these expensive JDM topwaters, or do you have just a basic one that it does its job? I'm trying to figure out if there's a real difference, and I want to hear your take on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't throw a lot of Japanese stuff to begin with, dude, which it might be surprising for a Western fisherman, but, because a lot of guys out here do. They do, and they catch fish and it's great. But yeah, I keep it pretty simple, man. With my topwaters, it's a Jaywalker. I've got some old spooks that I throw, but a Jaywalker from Berkeley, an old spook, something like that. And I feel like the 3 hooks is for largemouth. If you've got a bait that's kind of like a mid-size, you could have it's got 3 hook hangers on it. If I'm smallmouth fishing, I keep all 3 hooks on with the round bends.
Okay.
And if I'm targeting largemouth, sometimes I'll even take the middle one out and put 2 big EWGs on it And I found that's worked pretty well for me sometimes when largemouth are eating it weird. But the smallmouth, man, I go with all three personally for sure.
Sure. What's your setup for rod and reel combo when you're targeting those fish on top? And are you a straight braid or maybe a mono or fluoro guy? What's your setup like?
There's so many advantages to throwing it on braid. Like, that with mono, you get a little stretch. So you might land an extra fish once in a blue moon because of it. You definitely would. But I love the way the braid casts, where you can walk the bait. So I still go with braid, and typically I tie it straight. If I'm on Lake Mead or something like that, and you can see down 25 feet, I'll use a monofilament leader, like a 20-pound leader. And it's also nice, man. It keeps those hooks from getting up into that braided line. But it's just another knot, you know what I mean? And it's just another thing to mess up. And you make a bad cast and that monofilament gets frayed a little bit. And then it's a short leader that I use. It's only like a couple feet. So it becomes a pain. So I only do it when I have to. If I think the fish are relatively aggressive, I just tie straight braid and go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm a fan of the braid just because of the reasons you said, castability, and I think I can walk that bait a little bit better, whether it be more aggressive or just even if I want to more finesse walk it. I think it allows you to get that jerking motion and how you want that rod to react with your bait due to that braid is just I don't think you can compare it to mono or a fluorocarbon if guys are thinking about switching over, because I still know a lot of guys that actually you will use fluoro or straight mono on that. And I think they might be missing the boat a little bit when it comes to being able to walk that bait more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I've gone back and forth between like a cranking rod and then just a regular graphite rod for it. I've pretty much I've settled onto like a 7.3 medium heavy, like Abu Garcia Premier, just a standard 7.3 medium heavy graphite rod. Sometimes if I'm in like open water, I've tried like a 7.6 cranking rod. And when you have a fish hooked with that, you feel a little bit better about it. But it is like, it doesn't, like you're talking about the response of the bait when you're walking it and stuff. And the more noodly your rod is, you're going to lose that a little bit too. And you're also going to lose a little bit of your ability to launch a long cast. So I think, I go back and forth. I'm okay with doing it either way, but I like just the standard graphite rod.
Sure. So Josh, you've had a lot of success all over the country chasing smallmouth. I got to know, when you started going out east or the Great Lakes or even down south, was there a big learning curve when it comes to smallmouth fishing, or did you feel right at home?
This is going to sound silly, dude, but I'm still waiting for my learning curve on that because I've been so lucky on a lot of the northern lakes that I'm waiting to go up there one summer and not know what the heck to do and be like, oh, okay, this is because, hey, it's happened to me all over the country, man, but it hasn't really happened up there yet. So
sure.
My experience level up there is not what yours is. Like I haven't fished all seasons on all the different bodies of water. It's going up there for 1 or 2 tournaments a year. Right. And most of the time I've been able to get comfortable and catch them. But like I said, it could be this summer, dude. We've got a couple tournaments at oddball times a year when I've never been on these bodies of water, where it'll be really interesting. And it's like I'm waiting for it to catch up to me. But it's come a little bit more natural. Like I'm a terrible tidal water fisherman. I'm a terrible dock fisherman. I'm a weak grass fisherman, but I love to just commit to going out deep and fish and rock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're a deep, hard cover, hard structure type of angler. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, and that's what most of those lakes up there have. That's, some of them, not all of them have it, but you can find it, and you could usually find some fish on that scenario a lot of times up there. So literally the first time I went up there in 2013, I did that, and it went well, and I just have continued to look for that scenario, man. I mean, I haven't, I love drop shotting. I love throwing a Ned rig. I love throwing a spy bait, and I love throwing a small swim bait. But I've got next to no experience catching them on a hair jig. I I lean away from the shallow water deal up there. Like I like fishing shallow in certain places, but
Sure.
I couldn't tell you a tournament, a smallmouth tournament up north where I caught them on a jerk bait or even a crankbait. Like it's so far I've been kind of just, I've got a couple tricks that I've just leaned on every single time, and they've worked most of the time.
Listen, you can't go wrong with a drop shot, a Ned, and a spy bait at all, wherever you go up north. But I'll circle back real quick because I forgot to ask you this about these smallmouth on these impoundments out by you. Do you ever experience in the middle of the summer a shallow pattern where you're sight fishing, cruising fish, or does that not happen?
That's the way our stuff sets up. I don't find myself fishing like that very often because like that time of year, I'm fishing out offshore structure. I'm typically not burning up banks, and I'm sure it does happen, but I just haven't experienced it. I haven't been in a position to notice it and find it. But you see that in the winter, like those fish will be living in typical winter places, but you get 3 or 4 warm days and warm nights in a row, and all of a sudden one afternoon, dude, there'd just be some tanks swimming around up shallow.
Okay, sure.
But we don't see it as much in the summer as you guys probably do up your way, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we do. That's a solid pattern for sure. When you're, take me back to, or even now, when you first found out you got to go to the St. Lawrence River or a big smallmouth body of water up that way, what were you doing to prepare yourself even prior to leaving? Like, was there some concern, brand new way of fishing? Was there a lot of map studies? Was it videos? What was your main focus when you were trying to get acclimated to those bodies of water?
Well, I mean, no matter what and where, I think both of those things you mentioned, map study and doing all the research that you can is critical, no matter how much experience you get, right? Like, I mean, it's every tournament that's on the schedule this year, I'm going to do the same thing. So that's a big part of it. And 90% of that stuff gets thrown out the window the minute you get on the water because it doesn't set up the way you expected, or it just doesn't click, or maybe it does click in a different way. But you've got to do that stuff, especially a big body of water, man. And like, lakes that have, when you're showing up to a place, you can't get any information, and it's all new to you. If there's a lot of tournament history, it's real easy to go back and look at like, okay, well, a tournament's it goes down over here and here and here. This bay is always talked about. These islands are always talked about. This section of the lake is always talked about. But there's times like we went to Oahe like 2018. And dude, there had been nothing out there. Like it was pretty incredible because that was as big of a lake as we'll ever fish, excluding the Great Lakes. But this thing's like 180 miles long. Don't quote me on that, but it's big. It's big.
Yep.
And there's like there's not anywhere you can go on the internet and have it say like this is where tournaments have been won a lot, and there's no information. So that was an interesting challenge, dude. And like I ended up in that tournament. Talked about it with a buddy and James Elam, and we had found like all we had to go off of, dude, was looking at the maps and looking at Google and everything. There were sections of the lake that had a lot of rocks, and it was like, well, I mean, the rest of the lake is so void of cover. We're just gonna focus on these 10, 20 mile stretches that have structure, man, that have some some cover, have some rock. Other than that, the rest of this thing is just mud bottom. And the first 2 days of practice, that's what I did. And I was catching fish, and it was cool. But it was 50 miles from takeoff where I ended up thinking I was going to fish. And the last day of practice, I stayed close, and I realized those fish were much more related to bait than they were any type of bottom cover. So ended up finding some great fish close to the ramp that were bait oriented. So like you go in with the preconceived notions, and it ended up being like something completely different than what I thought it was going to be.
Totally. So you were Google imaging, basically looking at the bank, I would assume, and you found some chunk rock on the bank in sections.
Just boulders, it's like these boulders, definitely, they were, some of those natural glacial lakes like Mille Lacs, dude, they've just got boulders appear out of nowhere. And that's kind of what it was. Other than that, have you been on Oahe?
No. I've watched shows of walleye events, walleye tournaments there,
Yep.
right? To me, it reminds me of the surface of Mars. I'm just guessing, but I've been to South Dakota in that area, right? Yeah.
It's gnarly, dude. It's not like anything else. I mean, we had nothing to go off of. So it was like, well,
yeah,
at least you
we'll
got
start by
rocks
these
over
big
here,
rocks.
dude.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, a lot of people wouldn't know, if you're going to a new body of water, that's a great way to pinpoint something, whether it be rocks or wood or whatever. You can look at different types of vegetation and kind of get a starting point. But what I find interesting is the fact that you're able to say, you know what, that's a long run. I don't know if you had high winds maybe that.
Oh yeah, they were forecasted,
okay.
So I didn't want to.
Maybe so the last day.
That.
Sure. So the last day you thought, I'm going to try something a little different. So walk me through how would you go about locating smallmouth that are chasing bait fish that are suspended that could be there one day and gone the next? Like, what'd you do? Obviously you idled, but walk me through that.
Yeah. So that lower end of the lake, there wasn't like a lot of actual structure. There were some long tapering points and a few flats that would break off into the channel. And it's a deep lake. I mean, the channel's over 100 feet deep in a lot of places. But yeah, I probably got lucky on the first place and idled over some fish, and dropped and caught them. And like up in the areas that I had practiced, you'd have to work for them, and then you'd catch a 2-pounder, and then you'd catch a 3. And if you get lucky, you'd catch a 3.5. And it was like, sometimes it just hits you in the head. Right. And you have to recognize it when it does. Like, easier said than done. But like, I had been up there. I thought I'd be doing great if I caught 15 pounds. And I see this giant school of fish. I drop down and I catch like a 3 or 4 pounder. And then the whole school follows it up, and I drop it down again and catch another one the same size. It's like, well, they're all this size. This is completely better than anything else I found up lake. So I go, try to hit a couple more places and end up finding like a handful of places like that just in the last couple hours of practice. So I didn't know much about it. I just knew that, hey, they're down here. And sure enough, they did move around, man. I mean, and I figured they weren't much on the actual structure because the structure was so minimal. It wasn't like a beautiful rock pile out off the end of it on the side of a reef or something like that. It was flats. And then the wind would shift and the fish would move around. And, I was able to follow them for 3 days. Like, the wind would shift and they'd move, if the wind was blowing from the north to the south, they might swim a half mile from this flat point over to that one. And eventually you could track them down. But then the final day it slicked off and it completely fell apart. All those places completely fell apart. And, I ended up having to just junk out, 13 pounds or something, but they were predictable up until that point.
So you're talking smallmouth leaving, going half a mile away. So when you realize that, what's your next? Let's say you set up on a spot, and you probably not even picking up a rod yet until you graph them, correct?
A lot of times, for sure. Yeah, I think in that scenario, man, I just was like, I think I just fished, but yeah, a lot of times I would, for sure. And like, there were scenarios this summer where I did exactly what you're saying. This summer up on Sturgeon Bay, there were some fish that I think were pretty bait related that I was catching. And I was a lot of times, man, the wind would shift or I would just run out of fish on a spot. And that's one of the things with MLF, dude, is the fish just like, they don't last very long, right? You catch what you can, and then you got to find another spot. And the time's going, but your time in that scenario was better spent looking for them than just picking up, because like, if you pull up to a spot and fish around for 15 minutes and catch one, it does you no good. You got to find another spot that's got 100 of them on it and try to catch 10. You know what I mean? So, yeah, a lot of times, when you're looking for fish that are moving around, graphing is so valuable. It really is. So let me ask you this, dude. On my podcast, I talked to a guy from Texas that did some telemetry studies on largemouth reacting to like motor noise and stuff. Like, how do you think smallmouth are spooky with you idling over their head? And is there a certain depth where you feel more comfortable doing it?
Yeah, there's definitely a certain depth. 20 feet, 22 is kind of
how I feel.
Yeah. I don't, to be honest, if I'm in 15, I'm paying attention to the structure. I'm not really concerned about marking a fish.
because they probably swam off.
And that's for me, the deep water bite's the easiest because we have our electronics to depend on. The hard part is when you get into that 12 to 20 foot range where these fish could certainly be at any given time of the year. You don't have the ability to really graph with your electronics to see them. And so now you rely on either perhaps your side image and finding something that's different and maybe there's some fish holding, or you got to go and make casts, dude, and hope that they're there. But you could be casting for half a mile before you run across them. So it's much more efficient for me to just stay deep and worry about those fish, or go up shallow and I can see them. Yeah. I don't like to deal with that 10 to 18 foot depth range unless I have experience and kind of know. But if I'm on a new body of water, that's not what I want to play with right away.
That's a tough zone. That's a great point, dude. 100%. I agree.
Yeah. It's something about that. But as far as, you mentioned the southwest part of the state, or where you're from, and the lakes, Havasu being one of your favorites. What would be all around favorite smallmouth body of water across the whole United States if you had to choose one body of water?
I've got to say St. Lawrence, right? I mean, that place, I think a lot of people would probably say the same thing, but it's so full of fish. It's so beautiful up there. It's so unique. Like, the thing about it is it's just so different than anywhere else. It's sick. I mean, I love them all, dude. Like, Mille Lacs is unbelievable. St. Clair is unbelievable. Any of the Great Lakes, Ontario. I mean, as good as St. Clair is, everything's even a step bigger on Ontario. Like, you fish the river all week, and then you go out to Ontario, and it's like, dang. Even the gobies are a little bit bigger out here. Sure. Everything's a little bit bigger on the lake. So, but I've just, I've enjoyed fishing the St. Lawrence so much. That's probably the one. And I just talked about it while he did. Like, it's a sleeper spot. And it's not, you don't hear about 25-pound bags or anything like that, but it's such a cool, unique place. And I remember leaving there thinking, like, I don't know if I'll ever get back here. Like, it's so far out of the way of most of where you would normally have bass tournaments, national bass tournaments. And, like, it's in the Badlands, man. It's way out in its own part of the country. And, like, I'm like, dang, I would love to come back here, but I probably never will. I hope I do.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Now, I know we have some experience on Sturgeon Bay, Door County, Lake Michigan, those areas. What was your thoughts on that? Was that the first time you fished it more than once, right?
I've been there twice now. Yeah.
Yep.
So I fished the AOY tournament there in like 2015, and dude, fishing was brutal. Like, it was again, being a non-local.
Was that the one Zaldane won?
Yes.
Okay.
He caught him pretty good, but most guys, I mean, like, I remember, I think my 3-day wait was, I'm trying to get this right here. My 3-day wait was, I had like 18 and then like 12 and 10. And I had a pretty good tournament, which is for smallmouth in that field, dude. That's like, that's pretty weak.
Well, with 18, you had to have been right up there on day one, at least.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That was a good bag day one, but I just, had kind of barely held on to. I was just trying to make the classic, and I just needed to be like top 25. So, like, I really punted and played it safe the next 2 days to make sure I would get in. And I did. I literally stayed in the bay. But when we went back the second time, it was phenomenal. Fishing was a lot better. And my understanding is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I just think a huge percentage of the fish in there, the farther you get from the spawn, the more they're going to become open water nomadic fish. Is that kind of what happens, man?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture. I'm always for me, first and foremost will be the goby eaters and the structure and the deeper ledges, humps, things like that before I mess with those nomadic schooling.
Oh, sure. I hear you.
I would love to. I'll tell you what, I had an unbelievable day back in July on Lake Ontario this past year, where they were over 40 feet of water, 15 feet down. And I was by myself, dude, nobody around. I was calling my buddies because, like, somebody's got to, like, hear this or be with me today.
So they weren't eating gobies, dude, huh?
They weren't, man.
That's very interesting.
Crazy. I thought, man, I'm going to have a fun summer up here chasing these fish around. Dude, never found that deal again the whole summer. So that's how it can be.
Did you see the bait or no? Not really.
That's what was so confusing. No bait. obviously the live scope helped, and it was basically a small little kind of Damiki type head and a small little 3-inch type of shad looking bait,
Wow.
and just shaking it in front of them.
Interesting.
But like I said, that's what's cool about, well, bass fishing in general. There's so many norms and there's so many things that are like certain or, at least guaranteed almost. And then you can run into something crazy like this that I've never experienced something like that. And it happened. But is that a solid pattern you can rely on in the future? Why were they there? Where was the bait? What were they doing? It was flat calm. And a lot of times I have better luck fishing for suspended fish when it's calmer waters.
Sure.
Versus,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, hey, there's less current probably, right? So they're going to automatically lift up off the bottom. The more current, the more they're going to be sucked down to the bottom, right?
Yep. Yeah. But who knows? But yeah, those. So you were chasing suspended fish again on Sturgeon Bay. Is that what it sounds like?
I mean, a good chunk of them, right? Like they were, and that was the thing. Like in our deal, man. Like if you're better off trying to find places where you can catch 20 in a row than you are slowly hunting and pecking. And you can hunt and peck your way to a check, but like you got to find a group of fish if you want to really go far. So that was like same thing. Like last day of practice, I found some spots where it was like I felt pretty confident I could go catch just, a dozen nice ones throughout the day hunting and pecking down in the rocks. But I saw, idled over a couple spots late in the day where it was like they were way up they were from the bottom, but all the way up off the bottom. And the wind was blowing into something just right. And it's like, these fish probably aren't always here, but they're here now. And if they're going to be here in the tournament, it's going to be incredible. And so like I literally throughout the tournament, man, they were there one day, they were there at one point of the day, and then the next time they're gone. They were moving around a lot, but if you could run into 2 or 3 of those scenarios during the day, you could catch 30 or 40 pounds in a period. And if you do that a couple of times, man, you're golden. Like the first day was crazy. I could have done it. It was one of the best fishing days I've had, man. I had, I had some weird electrical stuff going on where I actually, the funny part is I thought I had a problem and I didn't have my graph plugged in properly, dude. So I wasted an hour of the first morning at the dock, and then the service tech comes out and he just like tightens up the, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm this stupid. But had a short day in like 6 hours, dude. I caught like 120 pounds off of like three of the places were just loaded. And then the second day, I'm in Lucas's group, and if I can beat him, or if I can get first, whoever gets first is going to move to the championship day automatically. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go hard. I got a full day now, and I can catch him. He had like 140, and I had like 123. Well, they're all gone. Every school of fish that I found that last day they're all gone. So like after about 2 hours, I was going to make the cutoff at the first day's weight. I just went looking for the rest of the day. Never found a school. So like I'm going into the next round thinking like, wow, I hope they show back up, but I spent a whole day and they were gone. Well, so the knockout round comes around and they're all back, dude. They're all back again. So catch them up and do good and make the final day. And they were back again the final day. I just kind of ran out, dude, after the second period. But just like the ghosts that these fish are, it's unbelievable. But that one day, the wind direction didn't change that much. I can't remember if it was blowing a little harder or a little softer.
Do you know why they left? Like looking back now, do you have a reason why they were gone?
No clue.
No,
I have no clue, man. Yeah, it was the wind direction didn't it's not like it switched 180 degrees or something. It might have shifted, 45 degrees or something like that. But dude, I don't know. And they were back. That was the weird thing. Like,
sure.
I was like, I got to check these places just in case,
Well, yeah. How was that feeling on leaving that morning, knowing that, your fish weren't there and you're going to go back and hope, and then they're there? How crazy is that?
I was like, holy crap. First drop, if they're there, they're there. You guys know how it is. And first 5 drops, you catch good ones. It's like, oh, thank God, but going into the day, I was like, everyone thinks I'm going to have a good day today, but like I'm going to nothing. Like there was nothing there in the last day of fishing. So it was pretty funny.
Man, crazy stuff. Good stories, Josh. We are getting low on time, so I got to ask you a couple questions. We try to ask everybody on the show. And hypothetically speaking, if you could use only one bait for the next season to catch smallmouth, what are you picking up and throwing?
Has anyone said a flatworm yet?
No, believe it or not.
That's
Why
crazy.
wouldn't they?
I think
You know what? Hold on. Time out. We got to talk about the flatworm. We got to talk about that magic bait. Well, I mean, we have to. We have to.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'd love to, dude.
Is that your answer? That's what you
100%.
Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
absolutely.
And I'm assuming that's going to be rigged on a drop shot for you.
Yep.
Okay.
The cool thing is you could rig it anyway, but if I had a drop shot, I had any rig, it'd be a drop shot for sure.
So what is it about that bait? Is it the scent? Is it it's got to be the scent, right? More than anything.
I feel like it is. I'm not a biologist. I can't tell you why it's so effective, but I've had so many, both smallmouth and largemouth, so many fish eat max scent when the bait's dead sticked. And of course they'll do that with a lot of baits. Like everyone's got a story about how they caught a big fish when they put their rod down to get a drink, or when they were just dead sticking it or had a backlash. But dude, it happens all the time. And it gives me a lot of confidence that if I know I'm around fish, I can just leave it in the water. I don't have to shake it or do anything. I just leave it down there. And eventually that fish is just going to swim over and eat it. And I've seen it. I've fished in crowds, and it got to the point this summer where in the tournaments, dude, that a lot of guys were throwing it. Not everybody, but if there was a crowd of 10 guys fishing one reef, probably 7 of the guys were throwing it, the flatworm. But I've seen it work around groups of people. So like you've still got to do a lot of things right. But there's something about it, dude. I'd be interested to hear. I need to listen back to some of these other episodes you've done, and I'll be listening to the rest of the winner to hear. And I hope maybe you'll ask a similar question about scent and stuff and see what guys think. What do you think, man?
Yeah, well, I think scent's important. Actually, here's the cool thing about doing these podcasts. I know nothing about smallmouth after listening to you guys and all the guests we've had. Like, it blows my mind, the stuff that I learned just taking and absorbing all this information. And there was a few individuals that really built a solid case for the use of scent. And it all starts back. And I can remember back in the day when I first started to experiment with different smallmouth baits, and Berkeley Gulp came to mind.
Yep. I mean, that was my original deal, dude. Like all my good tournaments early on were on a Gulp minnow for sure.
When things get tough for me, whether it be I'm on fish, but they won't bite for some reason, drop shotting, specifically deep fish, I go to that 3-inch smelt Gulp. And and by dead sticking that bait more often than not, I can get them to bite. And I don't know what it is about that. And I was going to have this conversation off the air because I don't know how much we want to share it with the listeners, or maybe I'm way off base here, but I wanted to ask you this. Let's ask it on live here. What if you took that max scent and marinated it in Gulp? I'm just wondering, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I might try that. I'm just thinking. I'm thinking.
Maybe it would be max scent and Gulp on steroids. That's hilarious, dude.
Right.
I don't know. Like the folks that are figuring the formulas out at Berkeley, they have fish, dude. They have fish that they bring in and study with this stuff. So like, I'm not smart enough to figure it out. I just am like, okay, they said this is the most appealing and they hold on to this the longest. I'm going to trust it. And I believe in it, dude. I 100% do. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know much about the biology of the smallmouth, but they are nuts for scent. And if you're down there and you're on a good day of fishing, we talked about some of the schools of fish when you idle over them and there's a million and the wind's got them blown into a spot, and you can catch them on a lot of different stuff in that scenario. But when you get that slick, calm day, or you're fishing around pressured fish, or it's your 3rd day in a row fishing a spot, that's when it starts to make a huge difference to have a bait with scent, in my opinion. I mean, it's when it gets a little tougher, which is not a secret. That's obvious, but that's when it really shines, because you got to maximize every single time you put your bait in front of a fish. First off, that fish has to bite. and you have to feel it, and you have to catch it. All those three things have to happen, dude. And if you've got a bait that's just a little less appealing, and first off, they might not bite it, but if they do bite it, if they're spitting it out right away, or if they're only biting the back half of the bait, it still does you no good. And the first day when these fish were unpressured and there's a million of them there, you got 50 fish there. But man, you're fishing for scraps by the time you've been fishing a highly pressured body of water for a few days. So that's when it makes a huge difference to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that bait. And I'll tell you what, while we're talking about Berkley and their products, there's another bait, and maybe you struggled a little bit on tidal water. I would suggest next time you're on tidal water to pick up a 7-inch, as dumb as it sounds, the Berkley curly tail, power bait worm.
Dude, yeah, I'm probably overthinking it, right? Like just going to something like that gets bit. Do you love that bait?
I do.
Nice. I like it. Right on.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, last question. Then we'll let you get going. What's your personal best smallmouth?
I don't know.
Don't know.
I don't know. I know I haven't caught like a 7 or an 8 pounder for sure.
Yeah,
I've caught, I've caught, some, probably a few 6s for sure. I've weighed in, a handful that were like just under 6. And, I've caught some practicing and stuff for tournaments. That all of my experience is just in these tournaments up there. I haven't fun fished up there a ton where those giant smallmouth live. Yeah. I've caught some in practice where you just look at it and say, good God, look at this thing. But I still think they're probably 6 pounders, which is a toad smallie, dude. Like
sure.
That's a toad smallie.
Absolutely. Anyway,
I know for sure I haven't caught one of those psychotic, a 7.5 pounders or something like that. What's your biggest, dude?
8 even.
Yeah, that's just out of this world.
Yeah,
where did you catch that?
Years ago, Sturgeon Bay. In between Little Sturgeon and Sturgeon Bay, and it definitely was a beast.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. But you don't see that too often. Anytime, we take it for granted. A lot of times those Great Lakes 5 pounders, it's special every time you get one. But when you've done it long enough, your new goal is that 6+ pounder now. You're realizing that's a special fish. It's not a 5 anymore because they're starting to be so common in these bodies of water that we love it. Don't get me wrong, but dang, you get really excited when that forehead kind of has that extra, kind of hump on it. You know what I mean? Yeah. When they get to that size and their pectoral fins like the size of your hand just sticking out of their side like that, slapping your face when you're holding them up. But it's awesome. Listen, I really appreciate you hanging out with us this week. Josh, how can people learn about follow you on social media and follow your season?
Thanks, man. Yeah, just all the basic stuff. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Josh Bertrand Fishing, and you can check out our podcast. I'd love to have you on too, dude. It's Anglers Happy Hour. Cool. It's a little less nuts and bolts, but we call it Anglers Happy Hour because it's literally exactly what you talk about after you get off the water and you go to dinner with your buds or you're hanging out at the bar with your buddies.
Love that concept.
That's the conversation. So we'll have to have you on, dude. I'll be in touch with you. But thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate you thinking of me. And I can't wait to see what you've got coming.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.
Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show and follow us on Instagram at SmallmouthCrush. Also, the YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and comment with a review below. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.